Hi everyone and welcome to my review of Void Linux. Now Void Linux is another minimalist Linux distribution that you can go ahead and download for free. Unlike distributions such as Ubuntu or Linux Mint or anything along those lines, it's not actually based off of another distro but is instead developed completely independently. Some of you, and probably most of you, are going to like this feature. Now, its installation process is not the same as something like Arch Linux, simply because it does actually have a proper installer, and it is a TUI, and I'll show that in a little bit. So there's no graphical interface, the installation is completely in the terminal, and after you install the operating system, you're going to be dropped off into the terminal, and then setting up Xorg in a window manager or a desktop environment is completely up to you. You're on your own from that point on. Now, one interesting thing is that, you have these various distributions. For example, you have Gentoo, which uses OpenRC as its init system. And you have stuff like Arch Linux, which uses systemd. Void has its own init system. It's called runit, and it is very fast. It is lightning fast. It's very good, and it's probably going to run very, very well on your computer. So in order to download it, all you really have to do is just go up here where it says download, and then you're going to have different architectures. Chances are you're going to want to go ahead and download the x86-64 version. Now, you do have different images, like you have different desktop environments that you can get. Now, whenever I use a desktop environment, I prefer to use KDE, which is not an option here, unfortunately. So if I had to choose, I'd probably go with XFCE, but I don't like having a pre-installed desktop environment, so that's why I always download the base image. Now, the interesting part is you can choose whether or not you want glibc or muscle, I believe is pronounced. So whichever you prefer, you can go ahead and download it. And there is this thing called the Void Handbook, which is very similar to the Arch Wiki. It has a lot of, information on different software and how to set it up, including how to install the operating system. So most very useful information. You can find it here. Though I did read, someone commented that it's called Void Linux because it's void of all documentation. Now, this isn't exactly the case, but the documentation, it could use some improvement, let's be real. Now, one thing which I will never ever forgive the Void Linux developers is for using WPA supplicant instead of IWD or Network Manager as the default, network wireless package, because WPA supplicant literally never works. At least in my experience, it is a completely garbage piece of software, and IWD and Network Manager are infinitely many times better. So why the developers chose WPA supplicant is completely beyond me, but obviously you can still replace it with something like Network Manager, and then you'll be good. I'll go ahead and show the installation process in just a second, but before I do that, I would like to showcase the XBPS package manager. So you know how in Debian you have apt, or in Arch Linux you have Pacman, and yay, well in Void Linux you have something completely different called XBPS, and the command to install packages is xbps-install. And to uninstall packages, it's xbps-remove. The package manager is actually pretty good. I consider it to be a pretty nice package manager, so it's pretty fast and enjoyable to use. You can go ahead and search for packages, like you can search for Xorg, and there's one package which is Xorg minimal, which is if you don't want an entire Xorg installation, just something more minimal, that's what you want to install. So this is going to include Xorg server and startx and xinitrc, all the stuff that you'd normally need in an Xorg installation without the bloat. So the package manager is pretty good, but a lot of stuff is missing from it. For example, there's no official Discord package. You have, different alternative clients, but the official Discord isn't even here. You can still install Discord on Void Linux by downloading the tarball from their website, but it's kind of something that you should probably know. So beware, chances are certain packages might be missing. If this is a big problem for you, then don't use Void Linux, but if it isn't a big problem for you, then you should be more than okay. Now I'm gonna go ahead and fire up VirtualBox and show you what Void Linux is really like. So here you go, you should be able to see everything here. The font might be a little bit blurry, but there's really not a whole lot that I can do. So you have two accounts that you can log into. You have root and you have anon. I'll go ahead and log in as anon and type in the password, which is Void Linux by default. And on here you have a nice environment that you can, play around with and do whatever you want to. But if you really want to install the system, you can type in void-installer and have to run it as root. And then this is what the installer looks like. I'll go through it in a little bit, but before I do that, I'm just going to showcase the package manager. So we're going to have to use sudo here, xbps, and then if you want to install something, like here I'll go neofetch, you do that. But before I do it, I have to do xbps install -s to synchronize all the packages. And then here I'm going to do -u to update all my packages. So I have to run this command and then it's going to update some packages. And now I should be able to do neofetch, and there we go. And if I type it in here, you're going to see the Void Linux logo, and we only have about 140 packages on the live ISO. So I'm pretty sure there's like no drivers on it, but you probably won't need them here because this is just a TTY. So I really don't think that you're going to have to ever really use it. So I'll go ahead and start up the installer now. I'm not going to go through with the installation because I actually already have a working installation, but all you have to do is set your keyboard layout, set up your network. Now from my experience, I was never able to get the network working, well Wi-Fi at least. I wasn't able to get Wi-Fi working inside of the installation. So this installer is just unable to configure Wi-Fi for me. Now since this is a virtual machine, I have Ethernet, so I can just automatically be connected. Here you set the source. So if you're somehow able to get network working, then you can choose to download the packages from the internet, or you can just use the packages from the ISO image, which is when I installed Void Linux, that's what I did. And then you configure your time zone, you configure the root password, then you set up your account. So the account that you're going to be using, because you're probably not going to be using the root account for everyday use, you just set up the name and the password, you partition your disk, and then you choose like the file systems. So your choices are BetterFS, ext, you can use F2FS, swap obviously, VFAT, you really just use that for the bootloader, and then you can also use XFS. I usually choose ext4, but I would recommend you to either use ext4, BetterFS, or XFS. So all you have to do is partition your drives, set up the file systems, and then install Void Linux. And from there you can get a basic installation pretty easily. Like you can set up Xorg and stuff like that. It really shouldn't take too long if you know what you're doing. I'll go into packages here and I'll search for KDE. So yeah, you have a lot of KDE packages. I think this one's called Plasma. Plasma Desktop is like KDE 5 is the package that contains everything that you'll need. And then you can also download KDE 5 base apps. So, oh, that just took me to GitHub for some reason, but oh, it turns out it got opened in a new tab. Okay. So overall, who would I recommend this distro to? It's definitely not for your average normie that's just trying to make the switch to Linux. I mean, they can install Void Linux and have a good time, but it's just not the target audience for this Linux distribution. It's mainly people that need a minimalist, lightweight, and lightning fast distro for their everyday use. If you're a sysadmin, then most likely you're experienced with working with systemd or maybe OpenRC. Chances are you aren't that experienced with runit at all, but I do think it's a pretty good init system. It's very fast and it gets the job done. So I think it's definitely worth a shot. At the end of the day, I think it's pretty good. I wouldn't choose it over something like Arch or Gentoo, but overall, I still think it's a pretty nice distribution. Anyway, I hope that you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, please like it and subscribe for more content like this, and I'll be seeing you soon.